Hi everyone, welcome to the Princeton Review's webinar, Master Strategies for Conquering the MCAT. My name is Valerie and I'm part of the Princeton Review's national marketing team. I'll be co-hosting our presentation tonight along with Doug McLemore. Before we kick off our webinar, let's cover a couple of housekeeping items. Just so you know, everyone's lines are muted, so if you have a question or if there's something you'd like to share with us, please use the question box located in your GoToWebinar menu bar. Also, we'll do our very best to get through everyone's questions tonight, but if you're unable to answer yours, one of our med admissions experts will follow up with you after the webinar. Additionally, tonight's session is being recorded, so there's no need to take notes. Each one of you will be receiving a copy of tonight's webinar recording within 48 hours. So sit back, enjoy, and learn some strategies. All right, so without further ado, Doug, will you hit the next slide for me, please? All right, so tonight we're going to be representing both the East and West Coast. Like I said, for those of you who are just joining us tonight, my name is Valerie and I'm based out of the New York office, and our MCAT expert, Doug McLemore, is based out of California. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to pass it along to Doug so he can give you all an introduction as to his experience with the Princeton Review. Take it away, Doug.
All righty. Hello, everybody. I hope everybody's having a good night. Currently, we're representing three coasts because I'm actually on the third coast down here in Austin, Texas. So go Gulf Coast. So we're representing everybody today. So a little bit about myself. I've been with the Princeton Review since 2007. And I've been teaching MCAT and working materials. I was the assistant content director for MCAT for a very long time. And then now I'm actually working on med admissions and helping people get improved applications, all kinds of fun things. Speaking of that, if you notice in the chat box, there's a little message that has popped up and will pop up again about a med admissions quiz. If you take the med admissions quiz and answer the questions there, it's questions about your application. We'll have somebody contact you about your particular application and let you know how you stand in, are you prepared with your scores, your grades, your experiences, all that fun information to make sure you have the best application that you can possibly have. So what we're going to be talking about today is a little bit about just the MCAT as a whole, what some target scores should be. And we're going to look at some strategies on how to attack the MCAT as a whole test. Then we'll look at some sample passages and questions as well. And then we'll look at a few things about how the Princeton Review can help you in your prepping for the MCAT. So without further ado, let's get on to a couple polling questions that we have. So polling questions, there's going to be a little poll that pops up for you, and we like everybody to answer here. The first one is when you plan on applying or hope to apply for med school. So you should see that pop up, and I'm going to wait for a few seconds to make sure everybody's getting these things answered here. And clear up a question. I know this comes up sometimes. This upcoming cycle means you're applying this summer for med school to start in 2018. Next application cycle means you're applying next summer for the 2019 start, and so on and so forth. So I have about 85%, 87%. Let's get that up to 99% voted here, guys. Let's get that all answered up. All righty, we're getting close, and we shall move on to the next question. I'm gonna close that one for voting. And I have one more question for you guys. The second one is, when are you actually taking the MCAT? So go ahead and let us know if you've already taken it, whether you're taking it in August, later than August, or next year. Not sure at all if you haven't registered for one. And not unsurprisingly, very few people have already taken it. That's why you're here, is to learn a few things about the MCAT. So before you go in to take it, you're all set. So again, we're about 85%. I'll give it a few more seconds to get us up into that 90% range. Make sure everybody's had a chance to think it through and answer. And just FYI, I see some questions are popping up. We'll answer those questions when we get towards the end. So keep on putting the questions in there, and we'll make sure to address your questions at the end. All right. So still 86%. Get me up to 90%, guys. You guys can do it. All righty, and we're going to close that one as well. So a little bit about the MCAT and like school to be prepared. And are we connected again? I should be back in. Can you guys hear me? Give me a little comment in the chat box if you can hear me again, please. That would be, I suppose, a question in the question box. Okay, yes, you guys can hear me again. Excellent. Alrighty, I apologize for that. Not quite sure how I got disconnected, but let's keep on trucking. So as I was saying, one of the things that we're going to be looking for is strategy-wise is making sure you have a good, solid target. Having a good, solid target score is one of your most important things to start with strategy-wise. So what is a good, solid target? Well, we all understand that GPA and MCAT are some of the things that they use to filter out applications. So that's what we say here, preliminarily screen the applications. So ways that you can actually go through the information, find out for the schools that you're applying for should be brought up is using the MSAR. And the MSAR is something that's going to be available to your advisors. You can also purchase it yourself online at the AMC. So that's going to give you some information specific for your schools. In general, what we want to look at is basically the median, the mean for every single year since we been collecting data. And what it looks like in the past year is that and that is for most states going. For all the schools you're going to apply to, you're going to get an interview at least at one of those schools. That's the target score we want to work for, that 509. And that's assuming you have a GPA in the 3.7 plus range. Don't kill yourselves to have a 4.0 because you don't necessarily need the 4.0. You can be just fine working with this lower GPA of 3.7. And it's not even a low GPA. That's actually really awesome. So don't discount that. And you can see this has been fairly constant over the years. It's gone up a little bit in the old MCAT score, but a 509 and a 31 are essentially the same thing. They are both around the 80th percentile. And the 80th percentile is what will make you that competitive candidate that we want to see, in fact. Alrighty, so let's look at what that score comes from. Each of the sections will give you a scoring range of about 32, and it's based on the number of questions that you get correct. So however many questions you get correct, that's the important thing to look at here. The versus 500, 125 for each section, and that actually a 50th percentile. So if you're at a 500 or 125 in each section, that's not sufficient. Most needs, you're gonna have to be higher than that, like I said, the 80th percentile. These are all four choice to multiple choice questions. To simply answer every single question, because message-based questions, freestanding questions, the variable difficulty. And the freestanding questions are going to be easier. You're going to have an easier to answer. For the passive case, there's going to be some questions that are just way beyond what you actually may be seeing. Questions, you'll want to spend a little bit of time just do as much elimination as you can and disappear them. Like just guess on them, move on, give an answer to every single question. Now, let me pause and try to make sure I've got good audio here again. I should be back in talking sync. There we go. So passage-based questions, as I was saying, those are going to be where you're going to find your really tough questions. Make sure you're simply answering every single one of them. It's best to make sure you can answer every single question. So guess, just simply guess on those questions. That is the best thing you can do. Alrighty, so guessing on every question is your most important strategy. Now let's get to know the MCAT a bit more detail. Let's talk about the MCAT as a whole here and see what kind of strategies we can hold on that. So when we look at the MCAT as a whole, we've got several sections, and you start out with the examining agreement. This is simply you actually agreeing that you're not going to tell anybody what was on your test. And that examining agreement is something that you just have to agree to. So don't really bother reading it. You're going to have to do it anyway. It's like kind of like signing your mortgage. So you're going to just sign your lease or your mortgage because you know you got to live there. Same deal with this test. Just get it done. Then you move on to this optional tutorial. Big strategy number one on test as a whole. The optional tutorial you should do, because you're going to do enough practice tests that you already know what the test is like. The tutorial has already been done by you at least half a dozen times. So use this time to, on your scratch paper, write all of the equations for your chemistry and physics, so that when you actually get started on the chem phys section, you're all like, oh, I got this. I already have my equations done. So you can do that through the optional tutorial time. You have up to 10 minutes to do that. You can also just sit back, take a deep breath, get yourself settled, and be like, I'm all ready to take this test now. Just chilled out, get your table all arranged, get the mouse where it needs to be, get your chair where it needs to be, raise the height of the chair, all that fun stuff. This can all be done in the tutorial, so you're not wasting precious testing time. Because once you get onto the section, the Chem and Phys section, you want that to be all test all the time. You just want that to be solid testing through that point. So you've got 59 questions to do in 95 minutes, and that's averaging about 1.5 minutes per question. So that is also like that, the time includes the time you have to spend in the passage. And at least in the science sections, one of the big suggestions there to do is, I don't want you to read it. We'll come back to that in a little while, but I don't want you to read the science sections. What I want you to do is I want you to skim through, find keywords. Once you've found the keywords, you're going to highlight them with your highlighter. Then you're going to jump to the questions. If you're spending more than about 2 minutes with a normal passage, that's way too much time in the science sections. In cars, that's a whole different thing. But in the science, chem phys, biochem, psych soc, spend 2 minutes max in those passages, unless they're a particularly devious passage, and just get through it, identify the words, answer questions. That's your key. Then you got this optional break here. Take the break. And one of the most important things to do during the break is to attempt to go to the restroom. And yes, I know people get a little freaked out. There's a line at the bathroom. You're going like, oh no, I'm never going to get back in time. The timer's going to move on without me. But the test doesn't actually move on until you go back and hit the next thing. So if it takes you 12 minutes to take your break to go to the bathroom in those 12 minutes, that's fine. No, it's not going to count against you. You're going to be just fine walking back into the section a couple minutes late, because the test does not move on without you. And it's important to do that because, yes, you can still go to the bathroom during the section, but the timer doesn't stop at that point. So your time will keep ticking, ticking, ticking away. So just make sure you got to do it, so there's no possibility that you're sitting there with your leg crossed going like, oh my goodness, I should have gone when I had the chance. Your mom and dad aren't there to say, get in, do that when it's, you should have thought about that before we left home. So moving on, you get into the car section. And car section is the place where you definitely want to read. And here you got to read all these passages, and you're going to have about 1 minute and 45 seconds per question, which is the really awesome thing. So 1 minute 45 questions per seconds per question is the what was I saying? 1 minute 45 seconds per question is actually really awesome, but it takes substantially more time to read during this section. So you've got to read the passages full through, make sure you've got everything locked down before you move on to the questions. In this case, you're going to have 9 passages, 90 minutes. You'll have 10 minutes per passage. You should spend half of that with the passage, half of that with the questions. And again, we'll talk about some of the key strategies on that a little bit later. You get to your lunch break, and the lunch break happens. You definitely want to take that lunch break, but make sure you're eating something not heavy, something that's like quick and easy. You don't want to be showing up with like a whole set of like that little sushi roll plate thingy that people do. Nah, that's too heavy. You want something easy, something snacky, like good old raisins and peanuts. You got protein, you got sugars, complex carbs, something to keep you going. And that's what you want to do through that time. So something easy, again, visit the restroom and just avoid other people during this time, because otherwise you get all kinds of stressed out. Then comes biochem. The problem with this, the reason why they put it after lunch is basically they're waiting for you to be fatigued. So make sure you're not eating too heavy so you won't be fatigued during this time. That's the biggest lesson to be learned there. Next break, you know the drill. Then the next section, same as all the other science sections. And then we get to our void question. Void question is this question that says, do you want your MCAT to be scored at this time? Like, well, not right away, but in the next 30 days, because for whatever reason, they're going to make you wait for 30 days before they'll give you your actual score. Bonus. But so the void question is saying, do you want to actually have this test scored? And most of you guys are going to walk out of that test feeling like you just got hit by a freight train. That's normal, and it's going to make you feel like, I don't want to score this test, man. I just don't want to do it. It scares me. I'm not sure that I did the best I could. That's a normal feeling, and that means you should not void the test. There's only 2 really good reasons to void the test. One of those is you were extraordinarily ill during the test, like you're vomiting or experiencing other GI problems. You're fevering, just ridiculous fever, cold sweats, that kind of stuff. Probably not in your right mind to be taking the test. So probably a good idea to void the test at that point. The other are what are called testing abnormalities that aren't actually considered abnormalities by the AAMC, which might be the internet went out for 3 hours. And they'll have you sit there and wait until the internet comes back on. You'll pick up the test where you left off. Or even worse, you might have to restart a section you already started. That is not something considered bad by the AMC, but it will be bad considering that it takes your test now into the 11-hour range or the 10-hour range. And you may be freaked out because you're just sitting there and just spending all types of time freaking out because like, oh man, what's going to happen now? What's going to happen now? So if you have a testing abnormality, that's the only other time I would suggest you actually do the void question. Then you get on to the satisfaction survey. I don't care what you do on this thing. Like, you can answer yes to everything, no to everything, whatever. That doesn't matter. Just move on, get on with your life, because that's 7.5 hours later and you want to get back to your real life. One important task that you need to do is prepare, like when you're doing your practice test, prepare for the time this test starts, which is 8 a.m. You should make it so that you get up in enough time to get to the testing center, have a good meal, have a shower if you shower in the morning, do your morning ablutions if you do them in the morning, all those things before you do your 8 a.m. practice test, which means you're probably getting up at 6:30, maybe even 6, even for practice tests. And I know that's hard during practice time, but it's a very good idea to do that so that you don't just get used to rolling out of bed and jumping onto the test. That doesn't really work that well, because that's not what it's going to be like in the real world. So prepare yourself in your practice. So some other things we see in the test. Here's what the test looks like itself. Let that load up just a moment. Here's what the test looks like itself. On the left side, you're going to see the passage. On the right side, you're going to see the question. And they only deliver one question at a time. And I believe there's a question in there, somebody was asking about how the questions are delivered. Again, we'll answer all those questions at the end. But the questions are delivered one at a time now. So you might think that you'll always be able to see the whole question. It is very possible that this whole question may not be visible. You might have to scroll the question as well. It is almost certain that you're going to have to scroll the passage. And in fact, this particular passage is something that has to be scrolled. And you can tell pretty easily by the fact that it's cut off here at the bottom. And when you scroll down the passage, there's a magical thing down here that you want to pay attention to. And it's the end of almost every passage now. The end of almost every passage, you will see a little blurb, as we call it. And the blurb is down here. I just put a box around it. And the blurb will actually tell you things about what the passage is about. It's a good window into the content of the passage. So you look in the blurb, read it. Like this particular one tells us about, it's a study about glycogen storage disease type 1. Well, I'm pretty certain this is going to be a biology passage and that it's going to have something to do with metabolism based just on the blurb. If that's one of my strengths, then I'm going to right now decide this passage is the passage I'm going to do. I'm going to do it right now. If that's one of my weaknesses, I may simply decide to skip this whole passage right now. I could come back to it. So this blurb tells you some information about whether you can do the passage now or you want to skip it till later, because you can't do as much with the questions on that as we used to, because you're going to have to scroll through other questions. Alrighty, so the question side, you'll see these questions here one at a time. They'll just be listed A, B, C, D. Also on the right side, you'll see this button that says periodic table on the science sections. This will disappear, of course, in the cars section where you won't have to need the periodic table at all. So if I click on the periodic table button, that's right here, up pops the periodic table. And it's a very, very simplistic periodic table. There's not much information on it. All you get is the atomic symbol, the atomic number, and the atomic weight. You do not get things like mass number or electron configuration or anything like that. So what you should remember about that is when you're practicing, don't get one of those fancy schmancy periodic tables that gives you all these extra little details, because on the real test, you're just not going to have that available to you. So don't get used to having that when you're doing your practice tests. Just like on the physics section, you don't get a calculator, so you can't practice the MCAT with a calculator. So all the math must be MCAT math, which is very, very simple math. Usually, you know, eliminating things on fractions and rounding things and making pi equal to 3 instead of 3.14. So keep it simple, because the MCAT has very simple tools. So one of the other tools that's just massively, massively important to you on the MCAT is the highlighter. And what you see on this screen right now is what will happen if you highlight with your left mouse button. If you take your left mouse button and click and slide across, you'll get stuff highlighted in blue, and then you'll get that little bitty highlighter symbol down in the right corner. Well, you're not done highlighting until you click on that little bitty yellow highlighter button. That'll turn the highlighting yellow, like we see here, and that means your highlighting is locked in and it's not going to disappear. So it will persist even if you jump onto another passage and then come back. So it's important that you click that little highlighter button, otherwise your highlighting will disappear as you move on to the next passages and all that. So can you use this highlighter tool anywhere else? Of course you can. And this is one of the coolest things. This is like the new feature of the MCAT that I just love, is you can highlight in the question stems. So I can highlight all this fun stuff in my question stem here, like that'll hook up with the information that's in my passage. And you can see here, this connects directly to what's in the passage. Plasma glucose to blood glucose levels. They're talking about blood levels of stuff over here. So there's probably some information that you can link together for this question and thus answer this question more easily. So learn to highlight in the question stem. And then You can also use this, what we call the strikeout tool, where you left click on the answer choice, it'll put a strikeout through it. Now, the problem with this tool is that it'll strike it out visually, but it won't keep you from answering A or C as the correct answer. So if you accidentally click C as an answer, then that's on you, because it won't keep you from doing that. So this is a visual strikeout system. You got to make sure you click the correct answer actively. So don't speed through this. Take your time, make sure you're picking the exact answer you want to pick. So those are some of the on-screen tools. One mention that goes with the on-screen tools is if you're practicing practice tests on a laptop, you have a touchpad, and a touchpad is a very different experience than doing the highlighting and the strikeout and the selecting of answers than if you're using a mouse. And at the testing center, you're going to have a mouse. So go to Walmart, buy yourself a cheapy $5 USB mouse, plug that into your computer when you're taking your practice tests, and blammo, it's just like the real thing. And by the way, when you're at Walmart, go get yourself like 20 garbage pencils. Like you can get like 20 pencils for $1. Those are the practice pencils that you're gonna have, or those are the scratch paper pencils you're gonna have. So you want the worst quality pencil with the eraser that tears the hole in the paper. That's the kind of pencils you're gonna get for the real test. That's what you should be practicing with. Not pen, not mechanical pencils, not colored pencils. You get one color, one lousy pencil. Well, they'll give you a couple, but they'll be sharpened and they'll both be garbage. So the key is get used to using a terrible pencil, because that's what you're gonna have. Alrighty, moving on. Let's look at some sample questions that we run into. Like, let's see what the kind of approach is for certain types of questions. So let's start with our Chem Phys section. Here's our first Chem Phys passage here. I know it's Chem Phys because I see something here about isotopes, and they're telling me a little bit about like centrifugation in there, and it looks like there's a weird technique that must be a new technique they're defining for me. That probably is what the passage is about. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get through it with my highlighter. So things to highlight: 99% U238, 1% U235, because they're chemicals, they're numbers. Another thing, like wavelengths and units, very important things to highlight. I'm going to add one more important highlighting thing in here, and that's they're bringing up this idea of centrifugation. So I would highlight that word. It's a technique. So they're actually giving me a technique in here that is probably going to be the point of some of the questions. Other things in here, they're telling me the relationship, heavier and lighter. So that's probably how these things are being separated. And down here, they're telling me how subsequently isotopes can be separated. That's done by photoionization. So it's these little details that you should highlight in the passage that help you identify what you need to know to answer questions. And right after you do the highlighting, you should do a summary. So for each paragraph on your scratch paper, right, paragraph 1, I've got 2 isotopes, hard to separate. I'm summarizing the whole paragraph in a few words. 2, separate by centrifugation. That's what the whole second paragraph is about. Paragraph 3 is about this AVLIS thing that separates things by photoionization. I'm getting the main idea and trying to figure out where are they going to ask me questions, essentially. So if I'm taking and tackling question number 4 here, I see, for example, that I've got 2 questions about separating based on their spectra. And the question is, do either of these paragraphs, and I can look right here at my passage map, do either of these paragraphs tell me about separation by spectra? Well, no, we separate by centrifugation, or we separate by ionizing something. It doesn't sound like the spectra have anything to do with it. And it turns out that these analytical techniques like spectroscopy don't ever do anything like separations. So I can just immediately cross out answers C and D because spectra absolutely do not separate. A little bit of content, a little bit of the passage map helps me figure this out. And now on this question, I'm home free. If you can get it down to 2, in most cases, you've got a much easier task facing you, because also you're down to 50-50. So if you had to guess, you got a 50-50 chance at this point. So bonus. Now I'm looking at my last two answers. I got density and I got attracted to a charged plate. Well, avlus is in the third paragraph. It seems like density is in the second paragraph. Answer choice A is a bad answer because density has nothing to do with avlus. It must be this attracted to a charged plate. So the key, good highlighting, good mapping, a little bit of content knowledge, and you can find your answer choices just like that. It's a pretty magical mix. Now, the sciences also have math kind of questions here. So I've got an electromagnetic blood flow meter, da 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 da. This is a great use of the highlighter for the question stem. So I'm looking through here and I'm asking myself, what are they actually asking me in this question? One of the best things to do with the highlighter in the question stem is to figure out, what are they asking me? And so what they are asking me is, how much work is done by the magnetic force? And it turns out that is like the single most important thing to this question, because all the rest of the information is just terrible. Because you're thinking, oh, I got to put these numbers in here and I got to do some unit conversions or square some stuff. It's a trick question, guys. It's a trick question. Because in physics, any kind of force, like magnetic force, centripetal force, normal force, that's perpendicular to the direction of motion is always going to do zero work. Oh, look at that, zero work. It's crazy how that works. So it's a trick question in that you probably crossed out zero right away in your minds that it can't be that easy. But in the end, once you find the question, it is. By the way, this is probably one of the most common physics questions you run into. You will see a work equals zero question almost certainly on your real test, because they love these types of questions. It may not be like this, but it'll be somehow related to the fact that perpendicular forces never do work. Then you get these ugly looking questions, and it seems like these are impossible to answer, but you know what? Break it down. When I'm drawing a Lewis structure, don't start by drawing Lewis structures. Start in your head by saying, okay, what do I know has to be true about Lewis structures? Well, the total charge has to add up, because I noticed that all of these seem to have different charges. That's a great place to start. Instead of trying to draw it, start with a detail. Details eliminate answers, because answer choice A looks like a charge of -2. Answer choice B looks like a charge of 0. Answer C looks like a charge of 0. And then answer choice D looks like a charge of -4. So I've got -2, 0, 0, -4 as my 4 possible answer choices. If I just use the detail that the charge has to add up to the total charge in the ion, which just happens to be -2, boom, my answer just pops right out at me, and I know that my best answer choice has to be answer choice A. So the best thing to do is often don't answer the question, but look for little details around the topic of the question so you can eliminate answers. We call that actually POE, process of elimination. It is one of the key standards by which we should be attacking every one of our questions. Looking at cars. So what do we do with cars? So you're faced with a cars passage and it looks like this. It's just passage, paragraph, dense, reading. Ugh. I don't know about you guys, but when I see this, my heart falls a little bit and I'm like, oh man, this section's going to take me forever. And I don't even know what I'm supposed to be looking for here. You don't know what you're going to be looking for here. That's why I don't want you to start there. I want you to start with the questions themselves. Look at the question. Here I've got question 28. Where should I be looking to find my answer for question 28? Well, it turns out the best way to find this is to preview the question, as we say, and we identify in my question that this is going to be in the 4th paragraph, and we're looking for the metaphor of war in that 4th paragraph. I know exactly where to go to find this information because they tell me where to go to find this information. So don't start at the passage, start at the questions. Let the questions tell you where the information is. So that I can simply come back here to paragraph 4 and see in here that I've got, oh, he even makes war upon it. So I see that in this paragraph, and the rule I have is read up 3, read down 3. Read up 3 lines, read down 3 lines. Somewhere within that, from the war statement, reading up 3 lines and down 3 lines, I'm going to find my answer about this metaphor of war. And while we're doing a session like this, it's very difficult to give everybody time to read through this and figure out exactly what these are. But what we see is that when we come to our question, what we're seeing is they're trying to compare contrast something, or sorry, not compare contrast something, but make a straight up comparison. They're not doing the contrast that we see in B, C, and D. So looking at the things in the answer choices, like what are the word choices they're using, comparison versus contrast, that is represented what we see in the paragraph itself. So word choice of the answers in cars, very, very important. One of the other really interesting things about the cars section, critical analysis, the reasoning skills, is not only do they tell you what to look for, sovereign, but it's again, the word choice of pronouns is a powerful thing. So in our passage, we're looking for the term sovereign. So let's go back and find that term sovereign here. So it looks like they used sovereign here, and they use pronoun its to describe it. On that, sovereign goes, oops. So judge, higher being, or king, or will most likely take it as its pronoun. Well, a superior judge is usually a he or a she. A higher being is usually a he or a she, and a is usually a he. Ah, damn it. Oh. Back. Sounded like, looks like we lost connection again. Can you guys hear me? All right, sorry about that. So as I was saying, sovereign with its is usually referred to the other three. So I can figure out that the answer to this question should simply be the state from the pronouns. And there you go. So little keys. It doesn't have to be huge things that tell you the answer. It just has to be little things that tell you the answer. It's very cool if you realize it. All righty, moving on to another question here. These last questions, based on the info in the passage, which of the following would most reasonably ascribe to the author? Well, these questions are hard, and what they often do with these is they will put them first in the list. They'll put them first in the list of questions. So the problem with that is I can't find this. This is going to be a whole passage kind of question, which means I'm going to have to find all the information about this passage first, and then I'm going to have to answer this. So the key on these types of questions is do them last. So skip through the rest of the questions. Make sure you got all the other questions done first. You've read through the passage a couple times at this point. Do this question last because they're looking for an opinion based on the info in the passage. And we're not going to know where to find that. It turns out it could be in the 4th paragraph. It might be in the 2nd paragraph. It could be the overall feeling for the passage as a whole. But when it's one of these, what we usually call these are opinion questions. There's also whole main point questions. These type of questions, they have something to do with the author as a whole, the passage as a whole. Do them last. After you've done all the other questions, you'll know most how to answer these questions. All right, let's talk a little bit about bio and biochem then. The biggest challenge people have with bio and biochem is this. Most of you, I'm going to bank on it, are probably bio or bio-related majors. You're probably going to be very few chem majors out there, physics majors or other majors, mostly biochem, which means to you, this section is the most interesting section. So what you tend to do here is you tend to read it a lot. You really get into these passages. You're going like, oh yeah, I love this stuff. This is really interesting to me. They got you. They just tricked you. It's not about that. It's not about all the interesting stuff in here. What you need to do is you want to spend a little time just highlighting, going through and finding little key details here or there. You don't want to spend all your time trying to figure everything out. And that's what you do here a lot, is try to read through it, make sense of all of the different information. It's not about that. It's knowing what is the key information to get. So if I'm running through this thing, like I know this passage is about vitiligo. It's a disease that they're talking about in the passage. Some things that I see here that pop out at me in the first paragraph: hyperthyroidism, and it brings up another organ system. We know that there could be something going on with death or dysfunction of melanocytes. And notice how I'm jumping around. I'm not even doing it in order. That means you're probably not reading it. You're just focusing on getting information out of it. Or cytosolic signaling protein. That tells me something about NALP1. And they're giving me an example. Okay, they're bringing up a term apoptosis, so they're bringing that up. I'm going to be able to find apoptosis in here. They're talking about macrophage-like white blood cells found in skin tissue. Caspases are brought up here, so that relates back to the apoptosis. Inflammasomes, stuff like this. Pro-interleukin. If I see pro, that tells me this is a zymogen. Or secreted, that tells me it's going to have a signal sequence in it. So the idea, and I'm not going to go through the whole passage here, but the idea is with these types of passages, you're not trying to make sense of everything. You're trying to get keywords so that when they show up in questions, you can go back and find that information. And again, I was jumping around. I wasn't trying to make sense here. That's what you want to be doing. Jump around, highlight quickly. No more than 2 minutes in the passage. So if I go on to my first question, according to the passage, how is the activity of interleukin-1 beta regulated? And the thing to me pops into my head, I'm a bio student, and everything I know about regulation has to do with, say, phosphorylation or allosteric sites, like allosteric regulation. Right away, these two answers jump on my radar. Right away, these guys, I'm tempted to check them out. But look what happened here. I don't see much in there about phosphorylation. I did see caspases. I didn't see much about RER, but I did see that whole zymogen thing. If I go back, they're talking about how this inflammasome cleaves pro-interleukin-1 beta, and then this active form, oh, they cleave it, it becomes active. That's my regulation form. So my gut feeling based on what my knowledge is from outside the passage will make me want to eliminate answer choice D, but it turns out it's the correct answer. And the only reason I'm going to know that's the correct answer is because I caught the little key thing that it said pro-interleukin in the passage itself. So this is an interesting statement here. Cars, you're not supposed to use outside information. It turns out in the sciences, you also have to not use outside information too much. Everything in the passages is actually based on the passage first, your knowledge second. Passage first, your knowledge second. I always say it this way. The question trumps your brain, or sorry, the question trumps the passage trumps your brain. Because if the question contradicts the passage, it wins. If the question contradicts your brain, it wins. So you got to go with what's in the passage first. A question I will answer out of the chat box is we're going for another 15 minutes or so. So here's another great example of a question of how scratch paper is going to be your best friend. These answer choices, they look crazy. They're crazy looking complicated. Simplify. This is what we call mapping your answers. So simply set up your table to say, okay, I've got lower or higher. So this is my expression level. because that's the first thing in every answer choice. I've got movement in every answer choice, and I've got the cell death in every answer choice. And what I can do is for all my answer choices, A, B, C, D, I can say I've got overexpression, underexpression, then D, of course, is underexpression. The movement is increase, 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 decrease. And then the cell death looks like increase, 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 decrease. So as I'm like looking through these things, I've got all these different pairing up of answer choices. And what this allows me to do is quickly look at the relationships between the different parts of the question, or sorry, different parts of the answer. And of course, find out that answer choice B ends up being the correct answer choice here. But it allows me to look at it in a much more critical fashion than what I would do otherwise. So mapping the answer choices is a simple technique to make complex, scary looking answers approachable. Mapping the answers. And then finally, with Roman numeral questions, one of the strategies that we always suggest here, on your scratch paper, write 1, 2, and 3 on it. And then identify whether each of the answer choices is going to be true or false, or sorry, each of the Roman numerals is going to be true or false. So if I'm looking at my answer choices, I see the Roman numerals show up, say Roman numeral 2 shows up twice. Roman numeral 1 shows up once. Roman numeral 3 shows up 3 times. By the way, it doesn't always work like that. But Roman numeral 1, 2, and 3 show up like this. There's some companies out there that are going to tell you start with the Roman numeral that starts 3 times or 1 time. I'm going to tell you start with the Roman numeral that starts twice, or that shows up twice. And the reason why is because immediately I'm going to be down to a 50-50 choice. And so if I start with the Roman numeral that shows up twice, I'm going to find that this one's true, because looking at the results in my table, I see that I see more of my gene expression here for vitiligo patients than I do for my control, because it's like -7 versus -10 is my exponent. And a way that's going to happen is I'm going to have a mutation in the promoter gene or region. Sure, if I have a more active promoter, I can make more stuff, which means immediately anything associated with 2, I should be able to, or sorry, anything not associated with 2, I should be able to strike out, which means B and C go away. And then now here's the magic part. I never have to look at Roman numeral 1 because it's already taken care of for me. Now all I have to look at is Roman numeral 3, and this says mutation resulting in the NALP1 phenotype could be in a gene for another protein. Well, that other protein could be a regulatory protein, so sure, that's true too, and that's an easier solution. So the key with starting with the Roman numeral that shows up twice is I only have to look at a grand total of 2 of the Roman numerals instead of 1. Now, this won't work on 100% of the questions, but it'll work on 95% of the questions to get you to your answer choice faster and more accurately. Boom and boom. All right, the last section. We're going to skip on to the last section, which is Psych and Soc. Whoops, go back here. So Psych and Soc. In the Psych section and the Soc section, most of, by the way, the content is psychology, not sociology. And this is where you're going to see an amplification of what we call experiment analysis questions, although you will see those experiment analysis questions in the rest of the test. But looking at this particular passage, it looks like it's a lot of reading, lots and lots and lots of reading. However, again, we don't want to read this stuff. We want to hit the high points. So we want to find out what is actually important in all this that could have questions asked about it. And most of the time, your big major focus here is going to be figures. Figures are important. When I look at this figure, one of the bars stands out to me as being unique. my first glance at the figure is that this right here is funky. These guys are about the same, these are the same, this one is funky. So there's probably a question about it. And looky, there is a question about this. Based on the results of the study, what can be most reasonably concluded about the efficacy for IBS sufferers who do not have an anxiety disorder? Note in your answer choices, you've got more effective, most effective, not effective, equally effective. This is very much like what you see in the physical sciences, which with greater than, less than, or equal to. So it helps you identify what's going on in this question. So when you go back to the figure, you can say, okay, it looks like those people with non-anxiety disorders are less effective, and voila, my answer just pops out as it's got to be C. But if I'm looking at the figure the first time, I want to be able to anticipate right away what that information is being, like what information is important there to be tested on. So that's the key to looking at figures. Make sure you note where it's at, because almost certainly there will be a question about that funky thing. Okay. Another question type is these types here, where they're basically talking about how the experimental design is used. So we got, given the description of the study in this passage, which unknown factor might have influenced the validity of the results? These questions come up now in the physical sciences too. It's not just psych-soc. These will be represented in biology, in chemistry, all of that. So when I'm looking at these types of questions, I should be thinking about things like control, sample size, double-blind studies, single-blind studies, how all that affects the results. Like, you know, not confusing, complicating factors, or complicating variables, things like that. I'm going to tell you, single most common answer for these questions would say, which factor would have the most influence? And I bet most of you guys are looking at this one right away and you're saying to yourself, I already know the answer. The answer is A, sample size. In any experiment, basically, the most common thing you can do to improve the experiment is going to simply be sample size. So do more experiments, have more samples in the experiment, and you're going to have a better result from that experiment. So boom, right then and there. The last kind of question that we do run into in psych-soc quite a bit is actually talking about these folks, these dead guys or gals that have a theory about how to treat something. And these honestly don't take the passage to answer them. In most cases, you should, based on your knowledge of the scientist, be able to pick out how they would treat somebody, or what experiment they might do, or what kind of a sample they might be looking at. So in this case, Sigmund Freud, we know that Sigmund Freud is a psychoanalyst who did a lot of work with id, superego, and ego, did a lot of work with Oedipal complexes, things like that. So how might Sigmund Freud have treated an IBS sufferer? Well, first off, there's one answer choice that's just really bad, because Freud, basically, he's a psychiatrist or psychiatrist. He's of course going to think there's a psychological cause to stuff. D is a bad answer choice. Let's get rid of it right away. That's essentially the cannot be determined answer of the psych-soc world. And cannot be determined is a bad answer choice. And then the rest of it is like, okay, we've got stress tests. Nope, not Freud. Group therapy? No, not Freud. Psychoanalytical? Yep, Freud. Boom, there's my answer. So as long as you know a good amount of just little details about each of the important scientists that the MCAT's going to cover, you should be able to just jump right to answers on questions like this. So we've seen a little bit of strategies on all these different things. Let me tell you a little bit about what we can do to help you, and then I'm going to open the floor up for questions, and we'll go through some of the questions we've gotten in the chat box there, in the question box there. So getting help on getting prepared for the MCAT is an important thing from the simple standpoint that it's just getting harder and harder and harder every year to get into med school. And this year is going to be no different than the last year's. The number of applicants is simply going to go up faster than the number of positions. Although Texas is really trying hard to change that because they're opening up med schools left and right. but unless you live in Texas, it's not going to change it much for you. So some of the things that we can do to help you, like number one, we're here to help you get good grades. So this is the thing we call homework help, and homework help actually is a 24-hour-a-day service. We can have tutors standing by. You can buy a box of 3 hours of help with these homework tutors, and they'll help answer your questions about like that exam tomorrow, that paper you've got to write, all kinds of stuff. Second thing, test scores, focusing on the test scores, getting you test prep. We've got everything from self-paced prep, which is you get the materials, we give you the syllabus, you teach yourself all the things you need to know. We've got our strategy course, which is a new offering, and our strategy course is shorter, and we focus on the strategy, you teach yourself the content. So again, we give you the syllabus, we say be prepared with this content before you come to our class, and then we focus on the strategies on how to approach each passage and each section. And then we have our comprehensive course, which is our ultimate course, and the ultimate course actually goes through content and strategy both, and that's our most rounded package of getting you ready for the test. And then applications, man, we will get you in. We have Anita Pardue, who does med school admissions along the East Coast, and she is our advisor for med school admissions. And she can help you make your application just shine. Like right now, you guys are all very unique, special individuals in your respective fields. But then when you go into the application cycle, you're in a room full of like 50,000 people, all the same as you. And that's what's awful. It's like now you're just the same as everybody else. You got to retweak yourself and make sure to, what's the word I'm looking for? Make sure you shine again. Make sure you stand out among the crowd. So, and here's just a list of some of the resources we provide. We have free practice tests online. We do have more of these seminars all the time. We have at least 2 webinars a month, I believe, on things from getting ready for the MCAT, getting ready for your application, personal statements, and all that fun stuff. So this is just the homework help, trying to figure out what you need to do for homework. You can call them any time of day, 24 hours a day. Test prep, like I said, and of course, med admissions. So I touched on each of these things. Alrighty, so what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna have, nope, that's not it. I'm gonna have Valerie help me out here and help me find some of these questions and answer some of these questions that we've had so very many of. So that's good. So Valerie, could you help me identify some of the questions I need to answer here?
All
Valerie,
right.
are you there?
Thanks
Oh, there we go.
so much, Doug, for all of that amazing advice on how to tackle the MCAT. So we did have a couple of questions come in as you were presenting. So the first question we received was, let me just pull it up right here. Do med schools super score the MCAT the way that colleges do for the SAT?
That's a good question. And the simplest answer is no. There are some schools out there that will do that, but for the most part, you should assume that they do not super score the MCAT, and that you have to have one test that represents all of the key scores. What may happen is you might get into a program like a post-bac program where they'll say, take the test a couple times and get this score on this section, this score on that section. That is the times where you might see a super score happen. But for the most part, you want to try to do this one and done. If that doesn't work, get it twice and done, and make sure that second time is your best time. And more than that will start to reflect on you in a negative way. So try to make sure you're doing this in as few tries as possible, because unfortunately, no, they don't do the super score.
All right. Another question we had come in was, how much time should a student spend to prepare for the MCAT?
How much time should it spend? I would suggest from the point you need to take the MCAT, give yourself 3 to 4 months of solid study time. Now, hear me out on that. 3 to 4 months of good solid study time does not mean 8 hours a day for 3 to 4 months. It means if you're going 4 months, 2 to 3 hours a day for 6 days a week, 4 months out. It gets exponentially more difficult if you compress that time to be prepared. So if you shove it down to 3 hours or 3 months, now you're talking 4 to 5 hours a day for 6 days a week. If you shift it down to 1 month, you're talking like 10 hours a day, 7 days a week to really give yourself enough hours in a day to be truly prepared for the MCAT. So 3 to 4 months at, 3-4 hours a day for 6 days a week is a good number to target for prep.
All right, another question is, should we go back to check our answers if we finish early, or should we learn to practice in a way where we just finish in time?
I like your way of thinking. I like the fact you brought up both of those. And the real thing is you should go the latter. You want to set it up so that you finish with only like 1 or 2 minutes on the section, so that all you're doing at that point is making sure all the questions are answered. That maximizes your time. You're spending the most time where you need it. If you end up getting done really early, that means you're probably rushing through the questions, and you're likely making a lot of what we call silly mistakes, where you eliminated the correct answer because you just didn't spend enough time to read it. So slow down and make sure you're using your time most effectively. Make sure you're finishing with 1 or 2 minutes to spare on the section. And that's just to give yourself enough time to make sure all the answers, like go to the review chip page and make sure all the tests or all the questions have answer choices selected for them.
All right, will the actual MCAT display how much time we have left?
Yes, there is a clock that shows up in the corner. It's a countdown timer. So like it starts at the 95 minutes and counts its way down, or the 90 minutes counts its way down. So you will have that. That for some people is really distracting because they sit there staring at it. So do your best not to focus on the clock in the corner, but it is there for you if you need it.
Okay, is the scratch paper lined paper or printer paper?
The scratch paper is a stack of 4 sheets. It's printer paper, it's blank paper, and it is colored. So it's usually a light color. It's like a pastel blue, pastel green, something like that. And it is stapled together in a little booklet. So you can't like go folding or tearing, or you can tear sheets off, but you can't go folding the paper easily. That's pretty much to make you not put pieces of paper up against the screen. So that's a tactic to keep you from doing things like that.
All right. What if you are registered for an exam, for an official exam, and you're not ready to take it? Can you void it and use this as an exam experience?
So 2 answers to that. The first answer is you can shift your test date back if you're 2 weeks out. So if say you're 3 weeks out from your test, or even 16 days out, you can still move your test date, and it'll cost you, but you can move your test date. That's preferable over taking it and voiding it as a test experience, because voids do show up on your test. If you are at that point where you're less than 2 weeks out, it's actually better to go to the test, take it, and void it, because if you don't go and take it and void it, then it shows up as a no-show, and schools will know you did that as well. So if you're more than 2 weeks out, move the test. If you're less than 2 weeks out, take the test and void.
All right. If retaking the MCAT, how many months should we wait until retaking?
If retaking, actually, in most circumstances, it's going to be a minimum of a month, because you have to wait for your scores to come out. Then, like, you don't want to take your right for your next test. As I would say earlier, so at least a month out. No longer, honestly, than 4 months, really, because you want to stay current, so you don't want to lose all you've done. Keep that at least around long enough to do some good for you later on for the next time through the test. And during that time, you need to prep. You need to be focused on getting a higher score than you did. So I would say there's a window, 1 to 4 months. That if it goes longer than that, it becomes read the test, because it's like inertia, study inertia. Use a little physics metaphor. Once you stop studying, it becomes really hard to start again.
All right, so it looks like we have time for about 2 more questions. So one of the last questions we had come in was, if, for example, you have a lot of time left in the Psych Soc section. I have at least 7 to 10 minutes left over with quite a good accuracy. Would it be helpful to read the whole passage, or is there a better way to utilize that time?
Honestly, if you have that much time and you're scoring high accuracy, like when you say high accuracy, I'm assuming you mean something like 90%. Reading the whole passage is not a problem. I mean, that just means you probably are a quicker reader in that kind of content and you're already reading enough of it as it is. I see no problems with reading the whole passage if you have time. That being said, don't just read the passage to get better, because most people don't have enough time to do that. So if you've got the option, I think that's a fine option to take.
All right, and then our last question. Is there a way to translate percent of questions correct to an approximate MCAT score? I know full-length tests are the best way, but I'd like to get an approximation of my progress as I do practice questions and passages too.
The unfortunate truth is the actual answer is no, because this being a scaled test, a different number of questions correct can be the same exact score, just depending on the test and how difficult that passage was and how difficult that section was. So that's the upfront answer. Now, approximately, if you want to get in the scoring range that gets you competitive 509 or up, you will probably want to be scoring 75% correct or above to be in that range. Now, like, that's a total approximation. I cannot guarantee that if you score 80% of your questions correct, you will get a 509. But if you're trying to find something at least to give you some peace of mind, then that would be my guess. My suggestion is 75% correct or higher is what you want to be targeting.
All right, let's just do one more. Someone just wrote in to ask, is the MCAT curved?
That's a great question, and it's not curved. Contrary to popular belief, this test is not a curved test. This is what is called a scaled test. And so you're not competing against other people on the day that you're taking it. You're not competing against anybody else. If you are competing against anybody, it's competing against all the people that took it the year before. Every year in May, they regenerate the scoring grid for their tests, and they released that back in May again this year, and it represented the whole new scoring grid, scoring curve, scale, I should say, not curve. So what they do is they adjust to the scoring grid that they've created. And they do that by looking at the difficulty of the passages and the percent correct that people are getting on when they test the questions out. Because there are certainly test questions out there, like they're being used on you right now. They're experimenting with you when you take your real MCAT for the following year. So it's not a curved test, which means you're not in competition with people. It's a scaled test. You're in competition with the scale, the score scale.
All right, thanks so much, Doug. So it looks like that's all the time we have now for questions. But once again, as a reminder, for those of you who did submit questions and who did not receive an answer, we will be definitely following up. Someone from our med admissions team will be reaching out to you with answers to all of your questions. And if you happen to think of a question after tonight's webinar, feel free to drop us a line at questions@review.com, and we'll be sure to follow up with you guys. Doug, is there anything else you want to add before we sign off for the night?
Just thank you guys. You've been awesome. And I love the questions I'm getting, which means I know you guys are all into this and you're going to rock your MCATs, man. So kick butt on those MCATs.
All right. Thank you guys so much for joining us tonight. Just as a reminder, you will all be receiving an email with a link to tonight's recording. If you'd also like to check out any of our other upcoming webinars, head on over to princetonreview.com/webinars. Once again, thank you, Doug, for sharing all of your MCAT wisdom with us tonight. And thank you to all of our attendees for joining us. Have a wonderful night, everyone. Goodbye.